You know the exact feeling. Your heart rate spikes, your jaw tightens, and before you even realize what you're doing, you snap at a colleague or fire off a furious message. And right after that key clicks, you feel the immediate, crushing wave of regret. We tend to judge ourselves harshly for losing control in these moments, but that explosive reaction is the result of millions of years of evolutionary hardwiring. To keep our ancestors alive, the human brain was built to prioritize sheer speed over accuracy. For highly driven or chronically stressed people, the tiny window between a stressful event and their physical reaction almost entirely disappears. The nervous system becomes so conditioned to react quickly that it misinterprets a passive-aggressive email as a literal physical threat to your survival. The psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl identified a specific pivot point in this dynamic. He noted that between any stimulus and our response, there is a space, and that our growth and our freedom depend entirely on what we do with it. Emotional reactivity is an ancient survival mechanism misfiring in the modern world. Unless we actively learn to reclaim that space, we remain prisoners to our own biological reflexes. Let's slow time down to a single millisecond to see exactly what happens when a trigger hits. Incoming sensory data travels straight to the thalamus, which acts as your brain's central relay station. From there, the data splits. One signal takes the low road, a fast subcortical pathway that shoots directly down to the amygdala. This triggers your fight or flight response in a fraction of a second, before you are even consciously aware of what's happening. Meanwhile, a second signal takes the high road. This route travels up to the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, working memory, and impulse control. But this pathway is significantly slower. Because of that speed discrepancy, the flaring amygdala initiates an endocrine cascade that partially pulls the prefrontal cortex offline. This is the amygdala hijack, where your logic center dims and your attention narrows entirely to survival. Losing your temper is a temporary functional blackout of your brain's reasoning centers. Once this physiological cascade begins, your rational mind is essentially sidelined by your own chemistry until the stress hormones begin to metabolize. A common reaction is to just clench your jaw and hold the anger in. This is called expressive suppression. Masking your outward behavior fails to turn off the amygdala. Your heart rate stays elevated and your bloodstream remains flooded with cortisol. A more effective alternative is cognitive reappraisal. This involves actively changing your interpretation of a threat before the emotion fully sets in. Reevaluating the trigger, thinking, maybe they didn't see the email, instead of, they're ignoring me, actually decreases amygdala activation at its neurological source. While cognitive reappraisal is a term from modern neuroscience, the practice itself was utilized over 2 millennia ago. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca observed that the immediate, burning impulse of anger can be disrupted, writing, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." The Stoics mapped out this exact mechanism. They identified the involuntary biological flush of emotion, like your heart racing, as propophaia, or a first movement. You cannot control this, but they argued you can control your assent, the voluntary cognitive act of agreeing with or rejecting that feeling. True emotional regulation means accepting that the initial biological jolt will happen and focusing your effort on intercepting your judgment of that feeling. Ancient philosophy directly mirrors modern neurobiology. Because of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire its responses through repeated practice, the space between a stimulus and your reaction is not fixed. You can manually widen that gap. This begins with a somatic interruption. When a trigger hits, execute a physiological sigh. Take a deep double inhale through the nose, followed immediately by a long, slow exhale through the mouth. This specific breathing pattern stimulates the vagus nerve, signaling the heart rate to slow and bringing the prefrontal cortex back into the conversation. You can then shift your perspective using the Stoic dichotomy of control. When you encounter a stressful event, divide the situation into 2 categories: the internal things that are up to you, like your choices and values, and the external things that are not, like traffic delays or another person's behavior. When you discard the external factors from your immediate concern, you reduce your cognitive load. By focusing only on your own actions, you gain the clarity needed to respond with intention. This discipline can also be front-loaded through premeditation. By taking a moment in the morning to mentally rehearse potential frustrations, You prime your brain to remain rational when a real stressor occurs. The storm of daily triggers and annoyances will always roll in, but creating that split-second gap allows you to act as the unmovable mountain beneath the weather, rather than the leaves violently blown around by the wind. By practicing the pause, you are training your brain to prioritize reflection over reactivity. Over time, the reactive impulse loses its grip, and the power to choose becomes your default response.